Loki admits that he has always been very jealous of Thor. It was okay when I was a child, and my father would hold the hand of myself and Thor at that time. Tell yourself and Thor that both of them are born kings. Available over time, he was obviously neglected by his father. Thor has his father's obvious favorites. As for himself, he always lives in his shadow. Obviously, it was himself and Thor who led the warriors of Asgard to fight against the rebellion in the Nine Realms. But after the victory, he was appreciated by his father and supported by the people of Asgard. There is always only Thor alone. Obviously, it is myself and Thor who are qualified to pick up the Mjolnir, which symbolizes Asgard's next god king. However, his father gave Thor the godhood of the thunder god. And I just got the godhood of Vulcan. I don't know why, but I seem to be born to reject the godhood of Vulcan. That is a kind of resistance and rejection from the subconscious. So back then I even prayed to my father, even if I couldn't get the godhood of the god of thunder. Then it can be exchanged with Sif's earth and harvest godhood. But in the end, his father severely rejected himself. It seems to have started from that time. The gap between himself and Thor in terms of force is getting bigger and bigger. Seriously, Luke doesn't hate his father. After all, the godhood of Vulcan and the godhood of thunder are the same. Both are advanced godhoods. And like Thor, he is the heir of his father, the god King Odin. They all have the supreme bloodline of the Aesir Protoss. The force is not as good as Thor, it must be because of his innate. Mother should have discovered this too, so she taught herself magic. Let yourself become the #1 magic mage in the Nine Realms. Only, in Asgard with a tongue. Mage is not respected by the people of Asgard like Thor. Maybe that's why. So even though I am the #1 demon in the Nine Realms, mage, I still like to hold 2 daggers and choose close combat. I want to tell everyone that I am also a qualified Asgard commander. It's just that the father is more and more partial to Thor. Since there is no way to surpass Thor in terms of force, let's start with strategy. But when I rely on tricks again and again, relying on wisdom to lead the warrior of Asgard to defeat the enemy. However, it seems that I still haven't gained the kind of respect I imagined, being respected like Thor. Instead, he gained the title of God of Lies and Tricks. Ah. Who doesn't know that in Asgard, the title of God of Lies and Tricks is more of a mockery? The majestic second prince of Asgard actually became the god of trickery in Asgard, a country of the Nine Realms Asgardians, who is very martial. What a mocking title. Looking at Thor, who successfully brought Asgard judgment again, and returned with Asgard warrior triumphantly. The trace of jealousy in Loki's heart can't be suppressed no matter what. Especially when his father praised Thor as a fool in front of everyone. Loki felt that his jealous flames seemed to be able to melt all matter in the Nine Realms. Why? Why is this arrogant guy able to gain the worship of the people of Asgard? Why did this reckless, stupid and belligerent guy gain such favor from his father? Obviously I'm no worse than him. Obviously I am smarter than him. But why my father's eyes are always unwilling to look at me? Jealousy blazed in Loki's heart. Especially when he heard that his father was preparing to hand over the position of Asgard's next god king to Thor. Loki's jealous flames reached a peak. Looking up at Thor, Loki is expressionless. But he was thinking in his heart that he must find a suitable opportunity to frame Thor, and then let his father realize that Thor is a stupid fool. This is not for anything else, let alone for the high throne. I just want to prove it to my father. I am no worse than Thor. I am also worthy of my father's love. Perhaps, waiting for Thor's coronation after a while is a good opportunity. After all, Heimdall's eyes claim to be able to see every slight change within the Nine Realms. But he couldn't see the passage leading to Jotunheim, the frosty Titan country. Well, it must be well designed, after all, with Thor's reckless and arrogant character. Once the coronation ceremony is destroyed by the Frost Titan, just need to insinuate yourself. Then he will definitely be hooked. At that time, all you need to do is to force yourself to be the king at the critical moment. Then the father will definitely see that he is more reliable than Thor. Everything was planned perfectly, now it's time to go back and design the details. It's just that he hasn't finished planning silently in his heart. The next moment, Lu Ji became emotional. What's the situation? Why did the father and Thor have a violent dispute? Wasn't it still a very harmonious compliment just now? Why did the two of them quarrel after I lost my mind for a while? And the tone is still so intense. Even an angry Thor began to accuse his father of being a fatuous king. No. Who can tell himself what happened? Aren't you just distracted for a while? And usually at this time, shouldn't the mother come forward to stop the two people's anger? Why this time, not only did mother not help Thor speak, but also did not comfort father. Instead, he stood beside his father without saying a word. Even when he heard his father say that Thor is not a qualified crown prince. To deprive him of his divine power and banish him to earth. Mother didn't intercede for Thor? What's the situation? Is this still the gentle and kind mother I know, the mother who acts as the glue between father and Thor? And, just banish Thor. Seeing his father's anger, he actually stretched out his hand and used divine power to deprive Thor of his power. And when the rainbow channel is opened to exile Thor and throw Mjolnir down. He also said that anyone who is qualified to lift the hammer can gain divine power. Loki is really stupid. This time, Dad actually played for real? He literally stripped Thor of his powers and exiled him. And until Thor disappeared under the light of Bifrost, the mother did not intercede. This made Loki even more confused. This wish come true? But I haven't designed Thor yet. Father. Father. Seeing this scene, Loki stepped forward in a daze and called his father. But in the next second, he saw his father staring at him angrily. Shut up, don't ask Thor for mercy. After finishing speaking, Odin seemed to be out of breath, holding the gun of eternity and going over. Father. Seeing his father fainted, Loki didn't care about being a little dazed, and hurried forward to help him. But he saw that his mother seemed to have been prepared, and directly supported the fainted father. Loki, your father was really pissed off by Thor this time, and I'm afraid he will have to enter the Eye of Eternity to recuperate for a while. During the time Thor was exiled, you temporarily exercised the right of King of Asgard to manage Asgard for your father. After speaking, he hurriedly supported the fainted Odin and headed to the Asgard recovery room. Only Loki was left standing alone, a little dazed and stupidly standing here. I don't know how long it has been. When Loki came outside Asgard, he sat alone on the steps of Asgard and looked into the distance. Until now, Loki hadn't reacted. For the first time, Loki, the so-called god of trickery in Asgard. There are times when I feel like my brain is not enough. Loki, what happened? Looking at Loki sitting on the steps, he seems to be in deep thought at the moment. Sif hurried over with the three warriors of Asgard and Asgard. I just heard the news that Thor was deprived of his divine power and exiled by the God King. What's going on here? Yeah, Loki. What the hell just happened? We obviously won the battle. Why would Thor be exiled by the deprivation power of the God King? Looking at the four Sifs who hurried over, their faces full of anxiety. Loki, who was gradually in a good mood, felt a little uncomfortable at this moment. Especially listening to Sif and the three warriors of Asgard, questioning themselves. Loki frowned even more. Although they are all playmates who grew up together. But is Thor so important in your heart? As soon as you heard the news that Thor was exiled by his father, you rushed over to question yourselves. What if it wasn't Thor who was exiled, but himself? Will you still be in such a hurry like you are now? Although there is such a slight discomfort in my heart. But Loki didn't show it. Instead, he looked at the four people in front of him and said calmly, I don't know exactly what happened, although I have been in the hall of Asgard just now. But the father and Thor started to quarrel fiercely while talking. Even Thor angrily accused his father, saying that he is a fatuous and incompetent king, and that Asgard will come to an end sooner or later under his leadership. It was because of such words that the father was completely disappointed in Thor, and then deprived him of his divine power and exiled him. Hearing what Loki said, Nozomi and the three warriors of Sheni all took a breath. Blame His Majesty the God King? How dare Thor do that? How could he do that? Now what? Hearing what Loki said, he glanced at the three warriors who were anxiously spinning around. Sif frowned and said to Loki, we can't just watch Thor be exiled like this. No, I'm going to see the God King, and ask him to forgive Thor's impulsive reckless remarks. Yes. Let's find His Majesty the God King together, you must have said that on impulse. Hearing Sif's words, the Fandral 3 warriors seemed to have found their backbone. Immediately wanted to enter the Asgard Hall to ask Odin. It's useless. Seeing that the 4 were about to go to Asgard behind him, Loki sighed, helplessly. Do you think I didn't persuade the king? In fact, when Thor contradicted his father again, I tried to persuade him, but he was scolded by him to shut up. And now, the father has been stunned by Thor's anger. Otherwise, my mother would not let me perform the duties of the Prince of Asgard during this time, and take charge of Asgard for my father. With that said, Loki lightly activated the eternal spear in his hand. Watching the movements in Loki's hands, the 4 of Sif realized it. What Loki held in his hand was actually holding His Majesty's eternal spear. After just hearing the news that Thor was exiled, the 4 were too anxious. So much so that they ignored the eternal gun in Loki's hand, which symbolized His Majesty the God King. But now, when you see the gun of eternity, only then did the 4 of Sif believe that His Majesty the God King was really fainted by Thor's anger. And Queen Frigg, let Loki take charge of Asgard during this time. Otherwise, how could the eternal gun be in Loki's court? This is going to be bad. Looking at the eternal gun in Loki's hand, the 4 of Sif were completely helpless. Thor was exiled, and His Majesty, the only God King who could pardon him, fainted from anger. Looking at Loki holding the eternal gun, Fandral's eyes lit up, as if he had thought of something. Loki, you are now in charge of Asgard for His Majesty the God King, so that means you now have the same status as the King of Asgard. Then you can use this status to pardon Thor and let the exiled Thor return to Asgard. Hearing Fandral's words, the other 2 nodded their heads immediately. On the contrary, Loki sneered inwardly after hearing Fandral's words. Although not planned by myself, but I finally waited until Thor was exiled, and I could manage Asgard, and prove to my father that I am no worse than Thor. I am also worthy of his attention and love. Turns out it's such a good chance that you let me pardon the exiled Thor. Not to mention whether you want to or not. Just say that the father exiled Thor for a second, and then passed out with anger. Will he pardon Thor directly in the next second? This is really worried that the father will not be pissed off, so I also joined Thor's ranks. Come on and try to piss off my father? When you co-authored it, you only thought about Thor, and you didn't think on my side at all, did you? Don't come up with random ideas. Listening to Fandral's words, Sif glared at him. His Majesty the God King just exiled Thor. If Loki pardons Thor at this moment with the identity of acting king, then isn't that intentional and that His Majesty's decision is wrong? Listening to Sif's words, Van Wall scratched his head. He also knew what he just said was inappropriate. But, now he really has nothing to do. Loki, you are the smartest one among the playmates we grew up with. You have to find a way to do this. Listening to Sif's words, Loki nodded slightly. Oh, now you know that I am the smartest person? I'm afraid what you just wanted to say is that I am the one among you who has the most scheming tricks. Although he thought so in his heart, Loki still said softly, although I don't think of a way to pardon Thor now, I still need you to help me deal with the matter of Asgard while my father fainted. Don't worry about Thor here. He is my 150 big brother. How could I just watch him being exiled? When the father wakes up, when the time is right, I will persuade the father, let him calm down, and then pardon Thor. After all, Thor is his father's most beloved son. As for this period of time, Sif, you pass my order to ask your big brother Heimdall to pay more attention to Thor, at least not to put his life in danger when he is exiled. Hearing what Loki said, Fandral and the 3 Asgard warriors felt a little relieved. Now that Loki has said so, as a conspiracy, which one is the smartest? Then Thor will definitely come back. As for Sif, although she always felt that there seemed to be something wrong with Loki's words, but still nodded. That's right, the most important thing right now is to let your big brother Heimdall pay more attention to Thor's movements. In case of danger, people like myself should go to the exiled land to protect Thor as soon as possible. Watching Sif and the 3 warriors of Asgard leave, the original expression was calm, even Loki who was annoyed by Thor's encounter. At this moment, the corners of his mouth raised unconsciously. What a great opportunity. Thor was exiled, and his father passed out. As long as I am managing Asgard, I can help Asgard deal with the big trouble of Jotunheim. Then, Father Wong must be very pleased when he wakes up. All because of Asgard. State, hearing a knock on the door, Steve Rogers put down his toothbrush and rinsed his mouth. Then he went to the door and opened the door. Sue. He looked at the person standing outside the door, who was wearing a silver and white cloak battlesuit at the moment, and he couldn't see his face clearly under the simple visor. Steve Rogers asked tentatively. Take off the visor, except for the vision function layer on the face. Su Che folded his arms and looked at Steve with a smile. Do you have time to watch a show? Watching a play. Hearing what Su Che said, Steve invited Su Che in and asked curiously, what show are you watching so late? Are you talking about a movie? But judging by your outfit, it shouldn't be just watching a movie. 3 streets away, Tony Stark, wearing the Mark armor, is fighting Obadiah Stein's Iron Lord at Stark Industries. But I heard that Tony seemed to be abused very badly. Natasha Romanoff got a call from Nick Fury. Then I was worried that Tony would not be able to beat the Iron King, or that something might happen, so I hoped I could help out. As he spoke, Yin picked up the unopened soda water on the table and opened it to take a sip. Then he smiled and asked Steve, who became serious because of the news. So, Man Chong Yi has nothing to do anyway, are you going? Definitely go. Wait for me for 2 minutes. Hearing about Tony Stark's accident, and listening to Su Che's tone, it seems that Tony is not the opponent of Obadiah Stan's Iron King. Steve Rogers definitely can't ignore it. After all, Tony is the son of his old friend Howard Stark. How could I just watch Tony being crushed and beaten? When Uncle? Ahem. Even for Howard's sake, you have to help Tony, right? Watching Steve walk into the room immediately, not even asking if Obadiah Stein was arrested. Why is it now in Stark Industries? Then there was no question about fighting Tony. Su Che took a sip of the soda water, and then looked at the brand of the soda water. Tisk. As expected, food, clothing, housing, and transportation all belong to S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. And even if you don't join S.H.I.E.L.D., you can get a salary every week. Sure enough, even the soda that S.H.I.E.L.D. prepared for Steve was the best. In less than a minute, Steve Rogers came out of the room in his classic battlesuit and shield. Sue. Let's go now. Okay. Anyway, I'm also worried that the glass in my coffee shop will suffer again. The last one was spoiled by the presence of Olivia Temple. But that time there was compensation from S.H.I.E.L.D. This time Tony Stark versus Obadiah Stan is going to break my coffee shop. I don't know if that fellow Tony Stark is willing to pay compensation. He should compensate, after all, he is not short of money. Who knows? Anyway, since the last time I cheated him with Peepo, this guy has been full of defenses against me, as if I would cheat him again. While talking, the two quickly rushed to the Stark Industry 3 streets away. It's not that Su Che can't use the water in the air to fly over. But back then Natasha Romanoff put her arms around her and let it go. I really can't imagine what kind of picture it is to be photographed with Steve hugging himself and then falling from the sky. And just 3 streets, according to the physical fitness of 2 people. You can rush over with ease. He even thought about rushing there while chatting. As for Tony Stark, will he be tortured by the Iron King because of this period of time? Well, this worry is a bit unnecessary. After all, even if the Iron Overlord wants to smash the Mark armor, it will take time, right? What's more, although Tony was more thrilling this time, he still won in the end. On the street where Stark Industries is located. Boom. Controlling the Mark armor that was knocked out, Tony Stark landed smoothly. Before he could react, he saw Obadiah Stan wearing Iron Overlord directly lift up a car and threw it at him. After quickly scanning the car, it was discovered that there were actually passengers in the car. Tony Stark ignored Obadiah Stein's small missile. Instead, he caught the car directly and steadily, then turned around and used the back of the battle armor to resist the small bomb. The strong explosion pushed Tony, who was fighting hard, several meters away. And the car that was caught and protected by Tony Stark was stepping on the accelerator fiercely at this moment. Hey ma'am, calm down. Listening to screaming while stepping on the accelerator, I even rolled myself under the car. Tony Stark tried his best to control the armor to climb out, while calming down the lady. However, when a normal person encounters such a fright, who can easily calm down? Not to mention that I was driving the car to get off work properly, but in the middle of the drive, a huge iron shell suddenly jumped from the sky. Holding the car is like another Red's iron shell smashed over. Before he could react, the car was thrown into the air, and there was a whirl of heaven and earth. Even the tall iron box was frantically firing missiles towards this side. Depend on. Under such extreme stimulation, how could the car owner calm down? Well, this is hard for Tony Stark. Wounded underground by the car kept stepping on the accelerator, and he was pressed on his body by the car. Even the battle armor was scratched by sparks on the road. Just here, not far away, Obadiah Stan is still staring at this side, and a small missile has been activated on the arm of the Iron Bully. Seeing this scene, Tony Stark controlled the battle armor and raised his hand, intending to use the energy of his palm to attack the Iron Overlord. It's good to delay yourself for a few seconds. It only takes a few seconds to delay and I can get out from under the car in a state of embarrassment. But before the palm energy cannon was activated, the missile from the Iron Overlord attacked in an instant. At the critical moment, a guy wearing a blue star-striped battlesuit blocked the missile with a shield. And another guy wearing a silver and white cloak battlesuit pressed his hand on the front of the car, preventing the bottom of the car from supporting him to continue rubbing on the road. Wow, isn't this the dignified Tony Stark? Tisk, you are in such a mess. I don't know if Pepper will feel sad for you when he sees the picture of being caught under the car. But I think, when she sees this scene, she will definitely forgive you for cheating on her. Lifting the car dragging Tony Stark with one hand, Su-Che let Tony Stark climb out from under the car. While laughing and joking, Silver Moon Knight. My god, that's the Silver Moon Knight that was uploaded on the internet last time. Oh my god, it's really Silver Moon Knight. Look, he lifted the car with one hand, and then rescued that red Iron Man. Oh god, who's that guy with the shield? Looks like Captain Magnesium in Legendary. Hell, didn't Captain Rogers die 70 years ago? How come he's still alive? As God bears witness, I must be crazy to see Captain Rogers and Silver Moon Knight teaming up in Legendary? O.M.G. Originally, he ran around to avoid, for fear that the battle between the two Iron Men would affect their citizens. After seeing Silver Moon Knight and Magnesium Country Captain suddenly, he immediately exclaimed again and again. Even some people hiding in the corner took out their mobile phones and started taking pictures. On sight. Damn it, I knew it was you. Climbing out from under the car, he pulled Su-Che's hand and stood up. Watching the driver screaming and hitting the gas and rushing out of the car, Tony Stark complained to Su-Che. I knew the person with that old popsicle and antique record player must not be a common man. But having said that, what's the matter with your visor? Why can't even JARVIS analyze your appearance even though it looks so simple? While looking at the stumbling, only less than 30% of the energy is left on the 287 armor. Tony Stark complained to Su-Che's mask. You can't be like Batman, wearing a helmet with cat ears so that others can't recognize it. You're talking about Catwoman. Before Su-Che could answer, he took the shield and kicked it into Iron Bully. In the end, Steve Rogers, who bounced back and landed smoothly, corrected Tony. At the same time, he stood up and continued to Tony Stark. Also Tony, we are here to support you. Are you sure you want to say that about your supporters? Well, Tony Stark just complained about himself. Steve Rogers said he heard it very clearly. Old antique records are fine. Why add an old popsicle? I didn't ask you two guys to come over to help. Please, you don't think you can beat me with just this stupid big guy in front of you. Listen to Tony Stark. Steve and Su-Che, who were originally staring at the Iron King, turned their heads to look at him almost at the same time. Stared at by two people. Tony Stark was silent for a few seconds, then he controlled the armor and spread his hands. Okay, my fault. Not far away. Seeing that he was able to use missiles just now, he could get rid of Tony Stark. But suddenly a family guy who had been dead for more than 70 years appeared and blocked the missile with a shield. Not only that, but another Yin Yu Chi who was particularly popular on the internet a few days ago. They also came out to join in the fun and rescued Tony Stark from under the car. This makes Obadiah Stine rage. Damn it. Obviously, these two guys are here to help Tony Stark. If it wasn't for the two of them, I would have already blown up Tony Stark to ashes. Obadiah Stane under rage raised the arm of the Iron Overlord without any hesitation. In an instant, bullets poured out towards the three people standing together like a dense network of fire and rain. Careful. Watching Obadiah Stine's movements, the next second Steve Rogers picked up the shield to block in front of Suche. And Tony Stark is wearing armor directly. Subconsciously and without any hesitation, he stood in front of the two of them. Jingling. Bullet attack on Tony Stark's mark armor. There was a constant, crispy, sound of ping-pong-pong as the bullet casings landed. Before Tony Stark raised his palm energy cannon to fight back, there was a slight sound of running water behind him. I didn't see how fast it was. Then I saw Suche wearing a silver and white cloak and battle armor, stepping on the water and soaring into the air in an extremely handsome posture. Then he rushed towards Obadiah Stane's Iron Overlord in the air. Its speed was so fast that even the cloak behind him rustled. And by landing huge amounts of inertia from the air, with just one kick, the Iron Bully, who was shooting at the three of them, flew out. Boom. There was a violent sound like a hammer hitting a lead block. The entire Iron Overlord flew upside down like a kite with a broken string, uncontrollably smashed tens of meters away. But as soon as the Iron Overlord landed, he fired a missile directly at Suche. Hello. Careful. Seeing the missile rush towards Suche at a high speed, Steve and Tony ran towards Suche almost at the same time. Boom. The distance of more than 10 meters has not waited for the two people to arrive. The missile directly hit Suche, and then a violent explosion occurred. The flames and strong airwaves shockwave caused by the explosion even lifted the manhole cover on the ground. The glass of the surrounding shops was crackled and shattered directly. After the violent explosion, Suche, who was in the middle of the explosion, did not move. At this moment, he stood there unharmed. Not even the slightest trace was left on the silver-white cloak battlesuit. That's it. Looking at the Iron Bully who fell on the ground and was flying up. With an extremely contemptuous attitude, Suche raised his hand and swept the dust left on the shoulders of the battlesuit. Mr. Tony Stark, please allow me to say something. The weapons manufactured by Stark Industries seem to be really not working. The real reason why you shut down the Stark Industries weapons manufacturing department is not because of this. Seeing Suche standing there intact, he even thoughtfully patted the dust on his shoulders. Tony Stark breathed a sigh of relief. But if Suche, who rushed over to support him, really had an accident, then Tony Stark felt that he would be guilty for the rest of his life. But the idea just popped up, and was thrown away by Tony Stark. Dude, I now know why Pepper called you Mr. Superman. Also, damn bastard, you are the first to say that the weapons made by our Stark Industries are not good. Do you know that if your words are spread, it will make Rhodes and the group of guys behind him sad? It's money. As for the reason why I shut down the weapons manufacturing department, it's because. Forget it. Even if I explain it to you, you won't listen. Do not know why. Every time I see Suche, I am the mouth that claims to be able to complain about others to the point of going crazy. But always deflated in front of him, he is like his nemesis. Every time I can say very accurately that I am speechless. Unfortunately, I still can't let myself feel disgusted. This is no one else. It made me feel a little stupid. Hey, that stupid iron shell has been lifted into the air. How much energy do you have in your battle armor? Do you need me to help you get rid of it? Don't worry. The shooting fee is very cheap. No, I can solve him myself. Watching the Iron King fly into the air, Tony Stark controlled the mark armor and started to take off. Do not know why. The stupid iron shell that Suche just said. Does Tony Stark always feel like he's alluding to himself? Forget it. Never mind. Damn, Obadiah Stine just made himself embarrassing in front of Suche and Steve. This face must be found by oneself. Take the shield and come to Suche. Steve raised his head and looked at the Iron King and mark armor flying higher and higher into the night sky. He couldn't help saying to Suche with a little envy, I can fly, It's really enviable. Looking at Steve with envy, Su Che, who was wearing a battlesuit, said, "Yes, it is really enviable to be able to fly. But then again, I seem to know that the military has an auxiliary flight device. According to your relationship with them and your influence among them, it shouldn't be difficult to come up with a set." Hearing what Su Che said, Steve thought for a while, then shook his head. "Let's forget it, I don't want to have anything to do with them now. You know, in the eyes of common soldiers, maybe I'm a so-called legendary. But in the eyes of those high-level executives, maybe I'm still the one who got the serum injected and then only performed on the stage to help them sell bonds. Also, I hate this kind of thing that is more symbolic than practical. Maybe they'll give me a huge comeback ceremony, but..." Speaking of this, Steve Rogers spread his hands without any entanglement. "Instead of helping them stand on the platform, it's better for us to drink coffee and go fishing every day. People have to have their own lives, right?" Hearing Steve's very thorough words, Su Che leaned on a car and laughed. "I agree with this point. After all, people are not machines. But are you really determined to reject Nick Fury's repeated invitation to join S.H.I.E.L.D.? I don't know either." Taking a deep breath, Steve looked up at the night sky. At this moment, the Iron Overlord and the Mark armor are still flying into the sky like shooting stars. "The only thing I am grateful for is that when I woke up from the ice, I found that I am not alone in this world. While it's to say it, I really feel lucky. Otherwise, I am the only one in this world who has been sleeping for more than 70 years, and when I wake up, I find that I cannot integrate into this strange world. I've had enough of that feeling. You know, in the first few days when I woke up, I couldn't sleep almost every night. Fortunately, you were with me." Turning his head to look at Su Che, Steve looked sincerely and said angrily, "Come on, man." Hearing what Steve said, Su Che spread out his hands. "It's like I'm your sleep aid, and I like women. I'm not interested in men. My orientation is also normal." Facing Su Che's ridicule, Steve looked at the shield in his hand with a trace of nostalgia in his eyes. "I also have Peggy. It's just... Well, actually I mean, even though Nick Fury is now the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But at the end of the day, Howard and Page built S.H.I.E.L.D. Even for the sake of these two people, if S.H.I.E.L.D. needs it, I may not be able to refuse. In this case, it can be regarded as having a legitimate job." Looking at Su Che, Steve raised the shield in his hand. "After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. pays me a salary every month. I can't just take their salary and not work. Although, Bai Tong's salary is indeed quite happy." Hearing what Steve said, Su Che nodded. "All right, help S.H.I.E.L.D. when you have tasks, drink coffee and go fishing when you don't have tasks, and live the life of common people. That's pretty good. How about you?" Hearing what Su Che said, Steve smiled seriously. "I know that Nick Fury attaches great importance to you. Usually when he calls me, he mentions you almost every few sentences. If you're going to join S.H.I.E.L.D., then I think Nick Fury will be crazy about it." Faced with Steve's very sincere invitation, Seping really wanted to join S.H.I.E.L.D. with him. But Su Che shook his head and refused. "It's fine for me to be like this now, let's forget about joining S.H.I.E.L.D. Besides, I don't trust S.H.I.E.L.D. either." "Don't trust?" Hearing what Su Che said, Steve Rogers' expression remained unchanged, but his eyes instantly became serious. "You mean, S.H.I.E.L.D.? Boom. Before Steve Rogers could ask the question, an icy iron bully fell from the night sky in the next second. The huge amounts of sound even shook the cars parked around to the sound of alarms. On the ground, a small hole was also smashed out. If it wasn't for the shockproof design, I'm afraid Obadiah Stan would have been thrown to his death. Haha. What did I say? The Mark armor wearing classic color schemes fell from the sky and landed in front of the two of them. Tony Stark opened the visor, and proudly said to Su Che and Steve, "I just said, a stupid iron shell wants to compare with my Mark armor? I'm enough to clean him up alone." Looking at Tony Stark's triumphant look, Su Che and Steve glanced at each other. "Then why don't you continue?" Pointing to the Iron King who had stood up from the ground at this moment, Su Che smiled at Tony. "Water?" Turning his head, he watched Obadiah Stan standing up from the ground while controlling the damaged armor. Iron Bully's arm also turned into a round of Gatling-like weapons. Tony Stark listened to the report from Jarvis. The armor had less than 12% of its energy left. Then he directly took a step back. Let's forget it. After all, you two have worked so hard to come to support me. If you don't let the two of you finish, maybe people will think that I, Tony Stark, are not polite. Well, with 12% of energy left, Tony thought it would be better for him to keep it and fly back to his villa. Damn it, if it wasn't for the arc reactor being snatched by Obadiah Stine. I have already dealt with him. Fortunately, I have support now. Anyway, there is Su Che, my own nemesis, and old popsicle Steve. There is absolutely no problem dealing with a mere Obadiah Stan. Tisk. Nice and polite Stark. This is the best joke I've heard this year, the best joke of the year. Hearing Tony's blunt words, Su Che laughed and teased. Then he got up and walked in the direction of Obadiah Stan's Iron Overlord. Regarding Su Che's ridicule, Tony Stark decided to ignore it. He has gotten used to himself not being able to tell his truth at all. Damn bastards, if it weren't for you, I would have killed Tony Stark, that fool who only knows how to have fun. Go to hell. It seemed as if he lost his mind when he watched Su Che walking towards him in the Silver Moon night suit. Obadiah Stine raised his arm transformed into Gatling's weapon with a grim face. Fiercely shooting bullets at Su Che like a rain of fire. Countless bullets are densely packed like a net, which seems to be able to illuminate the entire night sky. However, that powerful bullet couldn't affect Su Che at all. Just kidding, the owner of the Superman body is an advanced and perfect version of himself. If you were injured by bullets, or even killed, that is a big joke. Wow. It would be shocking enough to see a person resisting missiles and using his own defense to face Gatling's thousands of bullets without being injured. Then when I saw Su Che condense water droplets from the air, and then drilled into the gap of the Iron King's armor. After that, it was very easy to directly use the power of water, and the Iron Overlord was torn apart and turned into a pile of scrap iron. Tony Stark's expression was a little ugly at the moment. Maybe after going back, I should design a battle armor with no gaps to prevent water from entering through the gaps. Well, even if you can only enter the first layer of the armor, the inside of the armor is not waterproof. Perhaps, the anti-Silver Moon Knight armor should also appear on your own design drawings. Depend on. You must know that the materials used in my Mark armor and Obadiah Stan's armor are all materials used in the aerospace industry. The armor made of this material is not to mention the bombs, even missiles can't damage it. But it was such a hard battle armor, but Su Che easily broke it into pieces with the power of water. If I face Su Che in the future, then this ability. Tisk, he really is his biggest nemesis, not only in words, but also in terms of ability. I curse you, you bloody bastards are all going to hell, I curse you. After dismantling the Iron King, listening to Obadiah Stine's mouth and nose bleed from the force of the water just now. But still cursing himself with anger in his eyes. Su Che directly sealed his mouth with water. To kill or not to kill, it is best to let Tony Stark make his own choice. Lest it be an afterthought. Right. Seal its mouth so as not to pollute the back of its ears. Su Che seemed to have a perception of something, and glanced somewhere in the opposite floor. Then he ignored it, but smiled at Tony Stark. How about it? Do you want to listen to your uncle's truth again? Depend on. Made an international friendly gesture towards Su Che. Wearing armor, Tony Stark pinched his waist and said, let's save his true words in the prison. Are you sure you don't want to send him to hell? You must know that if he can escape from Phobo once, he might be able to escape the second time. Tony, choosing to be merciful to your enemies is not a good choice. Listening to Su Che's words, Captain America, who was holding a shield on the side, also nodded. Indeed, if the enemy cannot be eliminated directly, there will be a great hidden danger. Listen to both Su Che and Steve say that. Tony Stark glanced through the visor and his mouth was blocked by the flow of water. But he glared at himself, Obadiah Stan, who seemed to want to say something constantly. After a moment of hesitation, Tony Stark still shook his head and said, forget it. This time I will let Rhodes' forces imprison him personally. Well, that's your enemy anyway. Seeing that Tony Stark still couldn't make up his mind, Su Che naturally didn't say much. In the movie, Tony Stark can use Stark Industries' huge arc reactor to blow up Obadiah Stane. It was because at that time, if he could not be cruel, then he and Peepo would be the ones who died. But now, Obadiah Stane has obviously lost his combat ability. So maybe Tony Stark thinks it doesn't matter if he dies or not. Thanks. Looking at Suche and Steve, Tony Stark said. Although I can solve this stupid iron shell by myself. But anyway, you two also sacrificed your personal sleep time to help, especially for elderly people like Captain Antique. Sleep time is very important. So, Steve, do you ever regret coming to help him? Listening to Tony's relaxed tone, he seems to be out of tune, but he is actually expressing his gratitude in his unique way. Suche looked at Steve and asked with a smile. Well enough. Holding the shield in his hand, Steve also smiled and shook his head. I know, he is definitely Howard's son. Sure enough, even the way of expressing gratitude is so similar. As soon as Steve's voice fell, a siren sounded through the night sky not far away. Wow, it's really like in the movie, these people are always one step late. With that said, Tony Stark controlled the armor to leave the ground. I don't want to argue with them in the middle of the night, so you two, since you don't need an appearance fee, do you want me to give you a ride? You'd better carry Steve. Steve, because of Che's foot also opened a water garden. I have a way to leave. Seeing that both Suche and Tony Stark seem to have a way to take off. Steve shook his head and threw the shield to Suche, and then came to Tony Stark's armor. Sue, if I knew it, I agreed just now, and I want a set of flight equipment from the military. I don't know if there is one in S.H.I.E.L.D. otherwise, it would be really inconvenient. After the words fell, Steve grabbed Tony's arm and signaled to take off. Otherwise, the police car will arrive soon. Facing Steve's proposal, Tony Stark definitely would not refuse. In an instant, the crowd of people who were hiding in the video and taking pictures were curious, envious, watching and guessing. The three of them soared into the air, and then disappeared into the night sky. Boom. As the three people left, a bullet pierced the night sky in the next second, and accurately pierced the head of Obadiah Stane, who was sitting on the ground and kept waving. Well, you're welcome. Putting away the sniper rifle, Natasha Romanoff quickly disassembled the sniper rifle, and then pressed the headset to tell Nick Fury that the task was completed. One side quickly disappeared into this floor. Just leave a perfect corpse for the police car that is about to get here. In fact, there was Suche, the Silver Moon Knight, and Captain America Steve Rogers. Nick Fury wasn't worried at all that Tony Stark wouldn't be able to beat Obadiah Stane's Iron Man. But after defeating him, how to deal with Obadiah Stane in 2.6? Nick Fury knew that whether it was Suche or Steve, he would hand over the choice to Tony Stark. After all, this is Tony Stark's personal enemy. And he's the guy he considers uncle. So after Nick Fury decided that Tony Stark would definitely not kill him, he asked Natasha Romanoff to come over temporarily for an overtime shift. As for Obadiah Stane, Nick Fury still thinks that only dead enemies are the best enemies. Next morning. Hey, you know what? Obadiah Stane's dead. Looking at Suche and Steve with a cup of coffee, Tony Stark laughed. Just after we beat Obadiah Stane yesterday and we left together. Before the police car arrived, Obadiah Stane was directly killed by a sniper bullet. Do you think this stranger, who got rid of Obadiah Stane is coming for us, or for Obadiah Stane? Could it be related to my kidnapping? I always feel that there should be other forces behind Obadiah Stane. Otherwise, how did he escape from the FBI? Listen to Tony Stark swearing by conspiracy theories. Steve Rogers also nodded with a serious expression. Maybe you are right, Tony. We cannot easily rule out this guess. But Tony, have you found any other clues? Not at all. Faced with Steve's inquiry, Tony Stark spread his hands. It's as if after Obadiah Stane died, all clues related to the forces behind him were cut off. Even according to the results of my investigation, Obadiah Stane seems to really want to become the master of the Stark industry because of his inflated ambitions. That's why he planned to attack and kidnap me. Speaking of this, Tony Stark shook his head with a solemn expression. Master Kong, don't you think this reason is ridiculous? The more people try to cover up the truth, the more reality we can see reality. If it is said that this is just the ambition of Obadiah Stine alone, then I absolutely do not believe it. After all, he has had countless opportunities over the years. Why did he choose to act now? I even destroyed the entire Obadiah Stan's private weapons sales channel from top to bottom some time ago. Several incidents of Obadiah Stan using his private channels to sell weapons to people who could not find any results were discovered. I suspect that the people behind Obadiah Stine are these buyers who cannot be identified. Looking at Tony's serious expression, Steve nodded slightly. Indeed, according to Tony, if Obadiah Stine really is just his own ambition, want to get rid of Tony and annex Stark Industries, well, according to Tony's trust in him, he has indeed had countless opportunities to strike in these years. But he has been holding back until some time ago before making a move. What is he waiting for? There should have been better opportunities than this before. What's more, Tony also said that he couldn't investigate some of the people who bought weapons from Obadiah Stine. This is doubtful, and his escape from FBI custody. In addition, the three of them had just left last night, and Obadiah Stan, who was no longer of any use value, was directly killed. It all fit what Tony had guessed. Perhaps, there are other forces behind Obadiah Stine. Aside, look at the two people who are thinking and analyzing very seriously. Su Che lowered his head and looked at the coffee cup in front of him expressionlessly, but actually he didn't know whether to laugh or what. What the hell? The two future big three of the Avengers alliance are actually starting to make up a big conspiracy theory at this moment. Although, both Tony and Steve are very reasonable. But the truth is, the kidnapping and attack on Tony was planned because Obadiah Stine wanted to annex Stark Industries. The reason is that simple. How can there be so many complicated situations? He was able to escape from the FBI because Obadiah Stine bribed the guards. That's what Natasha Romanoff said when she called herself. I haven't done anything in these years, and it's also because Obadiah Skun's ambitions haven't expanded to the current level at that time. The most important thing is the person who killed him last night. If my perception was correct last night, it should be Natasha Romanoff. Watching the two of them brainstorm, and even start to fill in the details, they really hit it off one by one. For a moment, Su Che didn't know what to say. He glanced at the two people. Su Che crossed his arms and thought about it. As we all know, before Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Hydra was almost everywhere. And Steve is Hydra's most serious enemy. Tony Stark, Howard's son, has been wearing steel armor since he escaped from the desert. It should also be very concerned by the forces of Hydra. Although, at present all Hydra has been hiding, its ultimate purpose is for that vision plan. However, you must know that the current high-level executives in various fields, even members of Congress, have the shadow of Hydra. So, these two guys will not really find out some Hydra because of this incident. They are investigating and investigating. If so, that would be very interesting. Dude, you've been silent. What do you think the truth of the matter is? Picking up the coffee and taking a sip, Tony Stark looked at Su Che and asked seriously. Listening to Tony ask himself, Su Che gently turned the coffee cup. I'm not sure, but according to the analysis of your previous points, what you said also makes sense. Look, I knew that my guess should be right. Hearing Su Che also say that his guess is not unreasonable, Tony Stark turned his head to Steve and said, so, in addition to researching the upgrade armor, I also want to find out who is behind Obadiah Stan. Speaking of this matter, Tony Stark's teeth itch with hatred. Obadiah Stine. What a man he was. You have to know that you trust him so much that you even treat him like an uncle. But why did the ambition expand to the point where he wished to kill himself immediately? It must be because some kind of force is bewitching behind it. No matter what the reason is, Tony Stark decided to find out this behind-the-scenes force. Hi, Mr. Superman. Hi Steve. Good morning, both of you. Walking into the coffee shop, Peebo first greeted Su Che and Steve with a smile. Then he smiled at Tony Stark. Tony, why are you still here? There are still 20 minutes before the press conference begins. So you should go back and prepare in advance. Also, an organization called S.H.I.E.L.D. has found you, and I hope you don't admit that you are Iron Man in front of the media. And, they've prepared a speech for you. Oh shit, I forgot about that. Hearing what Pepper said, Tony Stark remembered. I still have a press conference to hold. After all last night, although not many people saw themselves. Even if he opened the mask in front of Su-Che and Steve. But those people did not take pictures of their own faces. But Obadiah Stine was photographed by many people. As one of the protagonists, Obadiah Stine is dead though. But this press conference must also be held. I'm going to deal with this press conference first, and we'll continue talking after I get back later. I feel like I've caught something. Blinking at Su-Che and Steve, Tony Stark picked up the coffee and drank it all. Then he took Pepper and left together. Watching the figure of Tony taking Peepo away. Steve was silent for a while, then smiled at Su-Che. Sue, he didn't pay the bill again. Director, I can't hold it. Watching Nick Fury come to New Mexico early this morning. Phil Coulson reports earnestly. We've tried everything since we found this hammer that fell from the sky. But the director, whether it is manpower, trucks, or cranes, cannot take the hammer away. So I can only ask people to temporarily build a simple camp here. At the same time, let our SHIELD researchers conduct research and analysis. Speaking of which, Phil Coulson looked at Nick Fury and said with a smile, Director, before the hammer fell, you let us pay attention in advance. So, do you know where this hammer came from? Facing Phil Coulson's doubts, Nick Fury did not answer directly. Instead, he looked around, and then asked, has there been someone nearby who has a strong will and thinks the hammer is his weapon? Not really. Listening to Nick Fury's inquiry, Phil Coulson replied. After the hammer fell, before we rushed over. A group of people tried to pick it up, but all failed without exception. I see. Let the researchers analyze this hammer carefully, but you can't cause any damage to this hammer, you know? Also, if someone comes here and swears that this hammer belongs to him, then bring him directly to see me. Well, the attitude is a little better. Hearing Nick Fury's order, Phil Coulson immediately nodded and said, Understood, Mr. Director. Why is your face still like this? After issuing the order, Nick Fury saw that Phil Coulson still had cracked skin, one patch of white and one black cheek, and said, Didn't you ask our SHIELD therapist to take a look at it for you? If you don't recover quickly, I'm really worried that your girlfriend who plays the cello will dump you. Facing the director's chat, Phil Coulson, who had known Nick Fury for a long time, smiled gently. Director, I've been lying in the desert for 3 whole months, and the condition on my face is not bad now, son. The ultraviolet rays in the desert are really too strong, and the extreme agents even feel like they are about to change their skin. Facing Phil Coulson's words, Nick Fury nodded. You should also pay attention to yourself, whether you should ask those therapists to prescribe medicine for you, or use other methods. Recover as soon as possible. Finding a girlfriend is not easy, don't break up because of this at that time. Yes, Listening to Nick Fury's order, Phil Coulson nodded with a smile. Wait until Nick Fury walks into the makeshift base to rest. Phil Coulson asked people to speed up the construction of the temporary base. Asgard. How's Thor? At the Bifrost terminal, Loki asked Heldam, holding the Eternal gun. He was fine, although he was inadvertently hit by a woman's car in Midgard and taken to hospital where he was electrocuted twice. But he is still not in any danger to his life. It's just that the soul can't accept the loss of divine power for a while, and become a common Midgard. Instead, Mjolnir was discovered by the Earth people, and they seem to want to study how to pick up Mjolnir. Earthlings. Listening to Heldam's words, Loki held the gun of eternity and looked at the magnificent universe in front of him. The people of Midgard call their planet Earth, and they also call themselves Earthlings. Also, we Asgard talk about the soul direction, but on Earth, they call it the spiritual side. How is God king? Faced with Loki's correction, Heimdall didn't pay attention, but asked Loki about the situation of the God king. Very bad. Looking at the magnificent and vast universe in front of him, it seems to be like a nebula map composed of countless bright colors. There was no expression on Loki's face. Father is still in a deep sleep. I asked Mother, and Mother said that Father may enter eternal sleep this time. I don't know the specific situation yet. Hearing the news brought by Loki, a trace of worry flashed in Heldam's eyes. If His Majesty the God King really entered the eternal sleep, then now the 9 realms are not at peace. Jotunheim is about to move. Although Walter Alheim has withered, the remaining Dark Elves are always at odds with Alfheim. I'm worried that a big war will break out between them. Over Mu's Belheim, some people tried to revive their god, Sudert, Hera Underworld. Mention the Underworld among the 9 realms. Heldam didn't continue talking, but looked at Loki and said, Asgard, as an Asgardian among the 9 realms, if it collapses at this time. I'm worried that the forces that are about to move will take the opportunity to attack Asgard. Even those ambitious people dare not attack Asgard easily, but once a battle breaks out between them. This is extremely detrimental to us, Asgard. After all, not every planet in the 9 kingdoms has the same reality-dimensional guardian blue as Midgard. Listening to Heldam's worried words, Loki nodded. Don't worry about Mu's Belheim, with the eternal fire, the advantage is on our side. Walter Alheim and Alfheim can't make too much waves for the time being. Even Malekith seems to exist only in the records. As for Jotunheim, mentioning the kingdom of Ice Titan, Loki took a deep breath, and his eyes gradually began to focus. I will find a way to eradicate this greatest danger to our Asgard. Don't mess around, Loki. Seeing that Loki seemed to have made up his mind, Heldam immediately persuaded, His Majesty the God King is still in. If I'm not completely sure, then I won't act rashly. He raised his left hand and glanced at his palm. In Loki's mind, he can never forget that just yesterday, he wanted to be more sure of eliminating Ice Titan Luff. When he went to the treasury to look for his father's collection of artifacts, himself came into contact with the casket of ancient winters. Changes in the skin. Although this idea is extremely absurd, when I have something to ask my mother for an absurd guess. What my mother said almost made me lose my mind. Turn out to be. He was actually adopted. Turn out to be. He was actually called a monster since he was a child, the son of Lof, the king of ice. Ah. If Lof is a monster, what is he? Son of the monster Loki Lofson. Fortunately, the mother's loving eyes finally stabilized himself gradually. It doesn't matter whether you are adopted or born by your mother. Asgard is your home after all. I, Loki, will always be the second prince of Asgard. Everything I do will protect Asgard forever, Loki. Don't worry, I've calmed down Loki. Listening to her husband's worries, Queen Frigg said softly, during this time, you can rest assured to cultivate. Although Loki was not my son, he was brought up by me alone. Maybe this incident hit him a little bit, but I believe he will overcome this psychological barrier. Hearing Queen Frigg's words, Odin sighed. Don't worry, Loki is our son after all. Holding her husband's hand, Queen Frigga smiled softly and said, although he has always been jealous of Thor, it's because you have favored Thor too much these years, so that you have neglected Loki. I know, in fact, you have always loved Loki, but sometimes the love given by the father is irreparable to the mother. It's like the lack of mother's love is also irreparable for father's love. But it's okay, Loki is our son, although he always likes to be naughty and play tricks. However, his nature is not bad, even knowing that he is not our own. But I still want to believe that he will make the most correct choice. Well, in the eyes of every mother. My children are all good in nature, but they are more naughty. 687 Listening to what Queen Frigg said, the worry in Odin's eyes couldn't go away no matter what. I wholeheartedly want to train my most valued eldest, second son to become a qualified king of Asgard. But he inherited his militant and arrogant character from his youth. This is not the quality that a qualified king should have at all. If he didn't listen to his queen's persuasion, he designed to exile Thor to the earth. I don't even know that Thor at this moment doesn't have the ability to inherit his throne. Once you enter eternal sleep, enter the Soul Castle. Then Asgard, led by the warlike and reckless Thor, will definitely go to the abyss. And the youngest son, who has been neglected by him, is smarter, but he prefers to use some cleverness. If he didn't experience some heavy price, then he could never have the quality of tenacity. It can be ignored for a long time, or it can be said to be a preference for you. Loki's mentality gradually became unbalanced. Perhaps, this time, he pretended to be stunned and entered the eternal sleep ahead of time. And banished Thor and let Loki take charge of Asgard for him. It can also be regarded as an experience for Loki. But at this time, Loki discovered the fact that he was not his own. Odin couldn't imagine what would happen if Loki made a mistake in his frustration. This is what worries him the most. In addition to his eldest daughter, he hated his own Hela very much at this moment. This was once the first in line to the throne of Asgard. Perhaps he is a qualified king. However, judging from the education of my 3 children, he is definitely not a qualified father. Don't worry so much. Gently holding her husband's hand, Frigga said with a gentle smile on her face. Taking this time, you should cultivate yourself so that the eternal sleep will come as late as possible. Thor will be exiled to the earth this time, although it will be difficult and even suffer. But I believe he will also mature and learn how to look at things from the perspective of a human, instead of a god perspective. As for Loki, he is a good boy. All he pursues is to gain your approval and love. Listening to Frigg's words, Odin gradually closed his eyes. Frigg is the mother of Thor and Loki, so she should know the existence of the 2 sons best. With her here, I don't need to worry too much about whether Thor can grow or whether the roadbed will make a mistake. Perhaps, I should have handed over the tutoring of the 2 children to Frigg back then. I should also rest for a while, otherwise I will wait until the moment when I enter the Soul Castle. It was the moment when Hela broke the seal and returned. After all, I have to wait until Thor fully grows up. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for the 9 realms. Watching Odin close his eyes and begin to gradually restore his body with divine power. The gentle smile on Frigg's face remained unchanged. But there was a hint of sadness in the depths of his eyes. Yes, this time Thor will be deprived of his divine power and exiled to the earth. It was designed by myself to persuade her husband Odin. I hope, the owner of that black gold diary, that young man named Suche. The things in the parallel world he recorded are real, and they can complement this universe. Earth, at the same time in Ta Hualin Cafe. I don't think so. Watch the news conference being broadcast live on TV. Steve shrugged his shoulders and said, although Tony, like his dad, likes to show off. But he probably won't just announce that he's the Iron Man himself from last night. After all, Peepo said when he came here that S.H.I.E.L.D. sent someone to contact her, hoping to tell Tony through her, don't admit it. Even the reasons have been found. So I don't think Tony is going to announce in front of the media that he's Iron Man. Looking at Steve, he is very confident, but his personality is still the habit of obeying orders 70 years ago. Su Che put down his coffee cup and smiled. The refrigerator in my room is empty, only a few bottles of soda are left. So, do you want to make a bet? Why don't you bet on something else? Hearing what Su Che said, Steve hesitated a bit. After all, you are only 19 years old in this world, and you haven't legally drunk alcohol yet. Facing Su Che's eyes, Steve smiled and raised his hand. Okay, don't mention this. Then use this as a bet. If I lose, I'll go and buy a lot of beer to fill your refrigerator. But if I win, Su, I hope you can accompany me to a place. Looking at Su Che, Steve smiled seriously. Although I really want to see her, but I can't make up my mind. After all, I can't imagine, when I appear in front of her, that I don't know what to say. I'm not even sure if she's okay with it, or if she wants to see an idiot who's 70 years late. Make a deal. Looking at Steve, he was full of hope, expectation, and entanglement. Su Che stretched out his fist and touched Steve lightly. Anyway, the bet was won by itself. If only Tony Stark hadn't announced in front of these media that he was Iron Man. Well, he's not Tony Stark anymore. Stark Industrial Hall, press conference site. Mr. Stark, many people saw that you were Iron Man last night. Are you willing to admit this fact? Mr. Tony Stark, was it you who fought Obadiah Stan in armor last night? Mr. Stark, do you know that Silver Moon Knight? Why did he come to help you? Is the person holding the shield really Captain Rogers from Legendary? Mr. Stark, please answer our questions. Standing in front of the microphone, listening to the questions from the reporter below. Tony Stark glanced at the handcard that Agent S.H.I.E.L.D. had already written. Looking at the content on the handcard, it was nothing more than that I had a party with a group of models in a certain island last night, and there were no fewer than 50 witnesses, etc. Inexplicably, Tanya Stark suddenly felt that it seemed to be meaningless. It's not that the content written on this handcard is meaningless. Instead, I feel that if I deny it, I will return to the kind of private laboratory that I stay in the villa every day. When I'm bored, I find a few models or female stars, and start a life like throwing parties every day. I always feel that this kind of thing seems to be getting more and more boring. Especially thinking about when I was with Su Che and Steve. Whether it's bickering or boldly guessing about other things. It seems to be more interesting than finding a large group of beautiful models and beauties to hold a party. Add Peepo. All right. He glanced at what was written on the card in his hand. He looked at the reporters with burning eyes under the stands. Tony Stark was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly threw away the card in his hand. Okay. Actually, I am Iron Man. Listening to Tony Stark not even having foreplay, he directly admitted that he is Iron Man. Those below were not originally hopeful. Even going back to write the manuscript, those reporters who were going to expose the truth exploded in an instant. Everyone got up and frantically surrounded Tony Stark. Regardless of what was behind Tony Stark, those security personnel came and surrounded him. Mr. Stark, do you admit that you are Iron Man? How did you develop the Iron Man? It is a new type of weapon, and is it ready for sale? Mr. Stark, was the man in that shield last night really Captain Steve Rogers who had disappeared for 70 years? Stark, why is Silver Moon Knight and Captain America together? What is Silver Moon Knight's true identity? Are you friends? Can you reveal the true identity of the Silver Moon Knight? And why did Captain America appear 70 years later? Watching the reporters swarming to ask questions. The entire press conference site was in chaos. New Mexico, inside the SHIELD temporary residence. Damn it, I knew he wasn't going to say what he had prepared. Watching Tony A. Stark actually admit that he is after Iron Man. Nick Fury threw the phone directly on the table. Nick. What did you call me over from the Eagle's Nest? It wasn't just to show me the news. With her legs resting on the table, a woman with a very beautiful appearance and a very hot figure painted red nail polish on her fingers. While smiling at Nick Fury, you should know that there are still a large number of rookies waiting for training in the Eagle's Nest. Even Nick Fury has to admit it. The woman in front of her is of the top class no matter in terms of appearance or figure. Not to mention that there is a strong charm in every gesture. It's like the female hormones walking in the world. Few men can resist such amorous feelings. Definitely, there are exceptions. Like, Nick Fury doesn't have any feelings for her. After all, the nickname of this woman in front of her. But the Medusa, Doris, who competes with Black Widow Natasha Romanoff. Let's put it this way, there are many people kneeling under her pomegranate skirt, whether they are men or women. But without exception, the ending of these people, hey. Originally, I wanted to name her Poisonous Scorpion, but she didn't agree. Hold on. Listening to Medusa Doris' inquiry, Nick Fury signaled her to wait for a while. After a while, Phil Coulson knocked on the door and walked in. Phil Coulson walked in and just wanted to report the results of his investigation to Nick Fury. But in the next second, he saw the woman who turned her head to look at herself, with a charming woman between her brows. He immediately shut his mouth tightly. At the same time, the body subconsciously moved to the side. It seemed that he really didn't want to have anything to do with this extraordinarily enchanting woman in front of him. Well, Phil Coulson knows this guy. Hey, isn't this the nice guy Phil Coulson? Why did he finally meet him, and he treats me like this? Oh, it's really sad. Gently blowing on her fingers that had just finished applying nail polish, Doris raised her eyebrows and glanced at Phil Coulson. Just a coquettish look in his eyes made Phil Coulson subconsciously move his body again. Doris. The sound prevented Doris from continuing to tease Phil Coulson's movements and expressions. Nick Fury waved to Phil Coulson. Soon, Phil Coulson posted a photo and attached a detailed file of what happened to the man in the photo in the past few days. Sure. More than 70%, sir. This man named Thor in the hospital has always claimed to be a prince from Asgard, but those nurses only think that he has mental problems. Flip through the information and take a look. Nick Fury took a look at the photo, this strong and handsome blonde man. Then handed the photo and the attached investigation file to Medusa Doris. Doris, this time your target is the person in the photo. Pointing to the photo, Nick Fury said seriously, you shouldn't have any problem taking him down. Oh? After it feels like the nails are almost dry. Doris then picked up the photo of Thor in hospital gown from the table. Looking at the photo, Thor's face. The corner of Dialys's mouth raised slightly. He is really a handsome guy, Nick, I like this breed. Well, it's about breed, not about looks, temperament and figure. Ahem. He coughed and cleared his throat slightly. Nick Fury said seriously to the interested Doris. Doris, be gentle. This person is very important to the future of our shield. I hope you can make him mature, and even become attached to the earth. Instead of requiring you to indulge and turn it into pieces. Listening to Nick Fury re-announce his mission. Dialysi took a look at the file, and then put the photo on the table. Huh? You said he is a handsome guy from an alien? That seems more interesting. Understood. If it's okay, I'll go first. After speaking, Doris stood up and gave Phil Coulson a wink. Then he turned and left with a Silver Bell-like laugh. Wait until Doris leaves. Phil Coulson glanced after her. Then he softly said to Nick Fury, Sir, if this person named Thor you mentioned is very important to our shield. So sending Medusa. Wasn't that cruel to a man called Thor? Cruel. Hearing some hesitation from Phil Coulson, Nick Fury's expression was as serious as ever. How can a person grow up quickly without going through some things? But after saying this, Nick Fury also had a rare expression, showing a trace of hesitation. You should pay more attention to this matter, and tell Doris not to go too far. Clear. Nodding seriously, Phil Coulson understood what the director meant. Geez, poor Thor. Thinking of Doris' methods, Phil Coulson sympathized with this guy named Thor, who claimed to be the Prince of Asgard. I hope, don't put on some mental illness.